Just a reminder to please mute yourself during the presentation. We're going to have some time for question and answers after each of the presentations. We'll have actually three speakers today, but two presentations. And the recording of this presentation will be saved on the Healthy Champaign County YouTube channel. And actually, I don't know if that's accessible to you, JR, if you could put that into the chat, then people can see the presentation from last month, which was Sophie Becker from Eastern Illinois Food Bank. And then today's presenters will be linked, and then we have two more State of the Plate series that will link there as well. And then if you are not receiving mailings from Healthy Champaign County and would like to, if you could please put your name and affiliation and contact email in the chat, we'll make sure to add you to the emailing list and keep you abreast of what's coming up, both with the speaker series and then the food summit scheduled for April 16th. There's also happy hour last night, maybe some few other events that you'd be alerted to. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second State of the Plate speaker series. My name is Tracy Barkley. I'm the director of Soul Grady Farm. We are a not-for-profit urban vegetable farm and ministry of St. Matthew Lutheran Church, dedicated to feeding our community and expanding access to fresh, healthy, and organically grown produce, especially to those with limited food dollars. We're entering our 13th year. We've been part of the Healthy Champaign County network for many years now, working to promote healthy eating and active living in our community. Last spring, Healthy Champaign County hosted the first Feeding Champaign County Food Summit. It was a full-day gathering of folks working in Champaign County to address food insecurity and to learn more about the problem, what programs are in place to address, what's working, what's not working, and to strategically identify and improve solutions. So I want to formally invite each of you to mark into your calendars April 16th for the second annual Feeding Champaign County Food Summit. This State of the Plate speaker series is laying the groundwork for the 2024 Food Summit by sharing community perspectives on the state of food access locally. So thank you for joining us for our second in the series. We're going to be hearing today from Noelle Park and Nicholas Lee from OSF Healthcare. They'll be speaking on the health impacts of food insecurity. And then we'll have a few minutes for questions and then move on to hear from Dr. Jesse Helton from St. Louis University, who's going to be speaking on the connection of food insecurity and child welfare with questions and follow. So with that, unless I'll check the chat real quick. Okay, thanks for putting that in, JR. All right, well, I'm going to invite Nicholas and Noelle to share their screen, please, and to start the presentation. If everyone else could mute, that'd be great. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And also, Nicholas and Noelle, if you wouldn't mind just saying a few words about yourself, introducing yourselves, and then say a little bit about OSF Healthcare for anyone who's not familiar or outside of our community joining us today. Thanks. We're glad you're here, everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noelle. I am so sorry my camera's not working, but I am the clinical dietitian here at OSF Heart of Mary, right on Park Street, right outside of the U of I campus. I am the clinical dietitian here. I do outpatient, inpatient, working with rehab sometimes, and also seeing patients on behavioral floor here. Nick is my manager here. He's also a dietitian. He works at Sacred Heart and Heart of Mary here. And we will be presenting on the health-related impacts of food insecurity. Okay, all right. Oh, if my computer is working, so sorry. Okay. So with food insecurity and chronic illnesses, with those who struggle with food insecurity, there is a higher chance to develop chronic illness. Out of many chronic diseases that have been studied with, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular, and malnutrition is the top four that has been seen in various studies between all different audiences, from children to women to men. With that, hospitals have been utilizing the social determinants of health within their charting. So asking the food insecurities, alcohol use, and so on. I've actually been seeing this with my patients today and recently, and we have been addressing these during our assessments and follow-ups, and in terms of how we're going to go by when we get discharged. So with obesity, there are consistent study results within women of having a 48% higher risk of developing obesity. Unfortunately, with the different review studies that I've seen, there's been a mixture of results for children and men, seeing a lot of really obesity, a whole mixture of obesity or malnutrition. This obesity is due to overconsumption of foods high in calorie, fat, and refined carbohydrates, as they are more affordable to purchase, and less consumption of fruit, vegetables, and dairy. And unfortunately, these could lead to other comorbidities such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and other metabolic syndromes. Diabetes is another condition that is seen with those who suffer with food insecurity. 37.9% of those who have diabetes experience food insecurity versus 25.8% of those who do not. Within the different hospitals that have seen through patients who experience hypoglycemia, they have seen that 50% of the reasons why they suffer with hypoglycemia is due to food insecurity. And those experiencing food insecurity have 65% of chance to have diabetes. And this is, again, similar reasons to obesity, replacement of fruit and vegetables with inexpensive carbohydrates, and of course, increased level of cortisol, our stress hormone, developing insulin resistance. Now, I've actually seen this with my patients here too. And when I do my diabetes education, I would ask them, do you suffer from food insecurity? What is your budget? Do you get any, food stamps? Do you go to the pantries here in town? And some do, they do reach out to the food pantries here, and they do tell me that they get a lot of fresh or shelf-stable foods on there, but they struggle to get a lot of like protein sometimes. And we do incorporate protein within our diabetes nutrition education. So we kind of talk about the strategies of, okay, how are we going to split up our food stamps, our budgets, and what are we going to seek out in our community, and what are we going to save them money for when we go grocery shopping. And we talk about the grocery store strategies in terms of how to shop, and what to look for, and how to store our foods within our household so that they prolong within our daily life. Cardiovascular disease is another disease that is seen with correlation with food insecurity. There's 240% higher chance of developing cardiovascular disease. Within a study, specifically within seniors, they have seen with higher chances of developing hypertension, CHF, and heart attack. And within those reasons, of course, in another study within cardiometabolic deaths reason, 45% of those deaths were seen to be attributed by the poor dietary habits. So again, low consumption of vegetables and fruits, and high sodium intake, low omega-3 intake, and high sugar sweetened beverage intake. This could be related to consumption of a lot of like canned goods. I have talked with many patients here who are older in age and kind of got to see what they consume in daily life when I do the low sodium education. And a lot of them do tell me they consume a lot of canned green beans, canned corns, and canned soups. And we do address these strategies within our education sessions on, making sure we dilute them or run them under running water. It's a lot of the information that's not provided, it seems like that gets attributed by these risks. Malnutrition is another comorbidity that is associated with food insecurity. 50.4% of those who experience food insecurity are at risk of malnutrition or is malnourished. So this is very important to be addressed because it could affect our muscle function. So all of our organs are muscles. So this would affect our cardiovascular, respiratory function, our GI function, and of course, decreasing immune response. So with malnutrition, we have those 5 different criteria that we do to address that malnutrition diagnosis. And one of the huge ones is going to be that estimated needs. Are we meeting those estimated needs prior to admission and since admission? So if we do see that again, we're not meeting that SME needs prior to admission, we do address those later on when they're about to get discharged and see, okay, what can we do? How can we develop these dietary, habits? Or really, how do we budget our foods to make sure that you are not going to be at a higher risk for malnutrition? And that is all I have. And Nick will be going on to that the common micronutrient intakes that are inadequate within those who suffer from food insecurity.
All right, thank you, Noelle. So going over the first micronutrient, vitamin B complex. So vitamin B complex is important for energy production, muscle contraction, cell production and growth, nervous system maintenance, and hormone formation, as well as protein, fat, and carbohydrate metabolism. So some symptoms that you'll see with a vitamin B complex deficiency might be fatigue, swollen throat, skin cracking or itching, and dermatitis, as well as pellagra. Next, we have vitamin A. So this is important for vision health as well as immune system maintenance. Some other functions include reproduction, health, growth, and development. Vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, meaning it is best absorbed when eating with fat-contained foods, versus the B complex vitamins, which are water-soluble. So some symptoms of deficiency might include xerophthalmia, intestinal and pulmonary mucosal breakdown, immune dysfunction, and hyperkeratosis. So next we have magnesium. So this mineral is important for blood sugar control as well as blood pressure regulation, energy production, bone structural development, calcium and potassium transportation. And some deficiencies might cause nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, fatigue, weakness, tremors, and change in cardiac status. So iron is important in carrying oxygen from the lungs to the other part of the body. So vitamin C and iron kind of work well together to enhance absorption because vitamin C reduces iron to a more absorptive state. So some symptoms of deficiency would be tiredness, shortness of breath, or chest pain. And the iron deficiency is really actually common in lower income individuals as well. This is a common thing that we might see in that population. So zinc is important for cell growth and division, as well as immune system. Also important in playing a role for healing tissues and building protein. And some symptoms of deficiency might include growth impairment, inflammation, GI symptoms, skin manifestation, and delayed wound healing. And then we have calcium. So this is important for bone structure and firmness, muscle contraction, maintaining a regular heart rhythm, as well as nerve function regulation. This also pairs with vitamin D to enhance absorption. So those nutrients kind of work together. I should also add that calcium, as well as magnesium and copper, all kind of interfere with iron absorption. So while iron and vitamin C work well together, calcium and iron kind of inhibit each other in a way as far as absorption goes. So some symptoms of deficiency could include muscle spasms, cramps, tetany, circummoral numbness, and paresthesia. And now I'll actually turn it back to Noelle for the rest of the presentation.
Right. Thank you, Mick. Within the average SNAP benefit for Illinois, I know that it changes yearly, but within the last data that I've seen, on average, household would get $260 $226 a month, which is not a lot. But there are some ways that we can definitely fit that budget and, of course, utilize any foods that could be obtained from different community resources. And so on the right side, I did develop some like meal plans that I do commonly come up with or suggest with patients here when I see them. That kind of meets all our goals of calories, protein, and healthy fats, and also the common micronutrients that are commonly inadequately consumed within those out in the community. So that's going to be as simple as oatmeal with peanut butter and some grapefruit, or a simple English muffin sandwich with like an egg and a cheese, utilizing any like canned meats too. So like canned chicken breasts and some beans and rice and a simple spaghetti and meat sauce, and so on. So again, these are just some ideas that I developed to help with addressing those inadequate micronutrient intake. All in all, in conclusion, food insecurity does increase the chance of developing comorbidities by 40%. Again, this might be due to reliance on inexpensive refined carbohydrates and reduced consumption of vegetables and fruits. Education on how to budget SNAP benefits and how to utilize food pantries are greatly needed. And we are trying to address those within hospitalizations by social workers here and also us as dietitians. Screening of food insecurity would be beneficial upon hospital admission to offer programs and resources to help with adequate nutritional intake after discharge. And again, this has been starting to develop within our charting system also known as EPIC, so that we can have these available to us so that whenever we see our patients, we can address those during our visits. And that is all we had today. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nick and Noelle, for sharing the information with us. I'm going to open this up for questions. You can feel free to write it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask a question that you might have, Nick and Noelle. I have a couple if no one else is ready to ask. Okay, so one of them, actually what you just ended on with, which was screening for food insecurity. That sounds like a really great idea. And I wonder how much of that's happening right now at just standard doctor's appointments. You mentioned intake upon hospital admission, but I wonder if you're aware of both at OSF Healthcare, but also at other medical facilities, how much that's actually happening.
Oh, that's a good question. So I can't really say with other medical facilities on how they're operating right now. With currently at OSF, I actually have started noticing this popping up recently on our EPIC system with the recent updates. I believe the social worker, they do meet with every patient and see how they are at home, you know, in terms of their accessibility wise, on their transportation and so on. So food insecurity has been popping up too. So we do see them in every patient, unless they're unable to talk for themselves, then family definitely addresses those too. So it's asked with every admitted patients here. And of course, I also ask with patients that I see outside as an outpatient.
Tracy, this is Jenny Benskin. I just dropped in the chat a couple connections. I know that's really a hot topic on the EPIC charting, so I love that that's happening. I dropped in the chat a organization, a nonprofit that's using EPIC data to gather this, not just locally, but nationwide. So they're aggregating big data. It's trending that way. So I love that. I'm glad to see people are using it. Thank you.
No, I definitely have been noticing that a lot, and I use it often, and it helps me when I go do my educations, and so that I can kind of make that a little bit more personal than a general one, so that we can kind of talk about what are some foods that you usually get. Do you get anything else, you know, somewhere else, and like at food pantries or any community centers, and we kind of orient our interventions at home towards what they can do personally.
Noelle, I really like the basic meal plans that you described. And if you have something written up that is a resource that we could share, I would really appreciate getting that out into the world. I know that, and we're at the farmers market, we have almost a quarter of our sales, at least at the Champaign Farmers Market, going to folks that are using Link or WIC coupons or the seniors coupons. And so they're demonstrating their low income and they're wanting to buy more vegetables. And I've learned over the years that some of our customers that are working closely with doctors on diet-related diseases, especially diabetes, know that not all vegetables are created equal. And so I was surprised years ago when I learned that kohlrabi was really high in sugar, for example. I mean, beets, a lot of people know because there's beet sugar, but a lot of the roots are high in sugar. So I wonder if you could speak to just in the vegetable world, if there are some that maybe are not what should be recommended and that kind of, all vegetables are good for you sort of idea. And then also if you could speak to whether OSF is considered a produce prescription program.
That with the produce prescription program, I cannot say. It would have to be addressed by our community resource team here. So, but with vegetables and affordability of vegetables and the different vegetables with diabetes management, I say all foods fit into diabetes management. There are no good foods or bad foods. It's just we got to pick and choose what's more nutritionally dense and what we have to monitor. So like you kind of addressed, root vegetables is going to be one of those that we do say, try to monitor those if you can. And I do talk about if you get some good foods from vegetables from farmers market, if you get those like greens or carrots or bell peppers, anything like those, I say, try to stock on those more than our root vegetables. I would say just be mindful of the root vegetable consumption that you have daily. And I also do encourage a lot of like freezing our non-carbohydrate containing vegetables so that they can be, again, used for a very long time.
I'd also like to add that, yeah, it's true. While some vegetables might have a little bit more sugar content than others, big picture wise, the fact of the matter is that most Americans don't eat enough vegetables. Period. So I'd rather tell people to try to get more vegetables, whether it's beets or whether it's carrots, sweet potatoes. Just get more of that fiber and all the micronutrients that come with it.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Angela Braley. I'm sorry, I'm driving if I break up a little bit, but I'm the director. I've been the director of Stone Creek Food Pantry for 17 years. So I've seen a lot of what you guys are talking about, but even just personally, my 9-year-old son was just diagnosed with ADHD, and I was as well, incidentally. But what's interesting, as I've done the research, been doing some research about it, the micronutrients that you say are missing often in low-income families and those people, that those are the exact same things that they say are missing in folks with ADHD. When you talked about like the B complex and magnesium and zinc, I saw all of those in the list. And I didn't know if you guys had any experience with that or read anything about that connection at all.
Go ahead, Maggie. Oh, okay. I'll start.
So-
Sorry. So unfortunately, I don't see a lot of pediatrics or anyone really with mental health disability here, unfortunately. Some I would outpatient or really inpatient as such. So I cannot really say as that's not my expertise, but I have heard in my cohorts and other communities that there has been some micronutrients relations with mental health and specifically with ADHD.
Yeah, I didn't have much to add to that other than, yeah, there isn't that much strong research out there that correlates specific micronutrients with ADHD right now that I know of.
I've seen quite a bit because I was looking for it specifically. That might be it. I've seen quite a bit of studies on it, and it's interesting to me. And I'm just wondering, and this is just my own musings about children living in poverty and I guess my question is that I would like to research is like, are they disproportionately kind of plagued with ADHD? Is that something that they're dealing with? Is that kind of what's happening in amongst our children? And if so, it really needs to be looked at.
Well, that is something that is really good to address, for sure, with those children who suffer from food insecurity. Unfortunately, again, I do not have the much experience and expertise in that area, but that's definitely something that I would definitely look into, for sure. Thank you for addressing that.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Okay.
Is there any role for supplemental vitamins, multivitamins, that kind of thing for folks who are food insecure?
So I would like to use more food-wise if as much as possible, rather than relying on a multivitamin if I can, just because foods do provide more in terms of nutrition and like amount of carbohydrates and protein, and so on, rather than just giving out a multivitamin. I think giving out a multivitamin is a great intervention for sure, but it kind of food kind of trumps the multivitamin in terms of when we're looking at nutritional intake and benefits. But definitely multivitamin could be beneficial.
Yeah, so multivitamins and vitamin supplements in general are usually used to treat like frank deficiencies that are not solved by food or easily solved by food. For example, like a lot of Americans have vitamin D deficiency that could be corrected by more sunlight or vitamin D intake, or you could just take a vitamin D supplement. So in situations like that, yeah, I would say the supplements could be helpful. But generally, yeah, just to kind of mirror what Noelle is saying, food first is the best option.
All right, we have one more question. It's coming from the chat. The question is there a resource that can help consumers learn how to prepare vegetables accordingly for the body to absorb nutrients best? Perhaps certain vegetables should be consumed raw for best nutrient intake rather than cooked, and vice versa.
There are some there are some education sources out there, like handouts on how to prepare vegetables according for the body. I would like to keep our water soluble vitamins B and C as raw as possible. That's just my preference. And of course, because they're water soluble, but other than that, vitamin K, A, D, E, just because they're fat soluble, it shouldn't be much of a concern.
Great. Thank you very much, both Nick and Noelle, for sharing your insights and your experience with us. And if there are resources that you would like to share with the group, can you please link them in the chat, or you can send them to me by email, and I'm happy to send them out to folks that are on the call today. Then this is just a reminder that if you are interested, if you're not receiving emails from Healthy Champaign County about the speaker series and you would like to, we have another one on February 29th. We have the Food Summit come up on April 16th, and then one more speakers series in March to be determined or to be scheduled. Please put your name, contact information, and your affiliation in the chat, and we'll get you on the list. All right. Okay, so up next, we have Dr. Jesse Helton. He's coming to us from St. Louis University. I will say that Jesse helped start the farm and was on the initial board of directors for Solograti Farm. And so we're really fortunate to have him with us today, and fortunate that he was part of the group that got this farm and the service we're doing to our community off the ground. So Jesse, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about yourself, just a little more biographic information, and then thank you for sharing your screen. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for being with us.
Sure. Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? Are we good? Yep, okay. It blows my mind that you are in your 13th year, because I was there at the beginning with Pastor Bob, who I see on here too. So it really warms my heart to be with you all and continue to see the good work that Sola Gracia is doing in the community around Champaign. So I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work at St. Louis University. So St. Louis, as you probably know, is a very food insecure area. We have many places in our city. Transportation is terrible. Infrastructure is terrible in St. Louis, and we have many places that are food deserts. So there's just not a place to get groceries, even though it's in the city. I've been fortunate since I've been here to be working with statewide agencies, the equivalent of Catholic Charities here in Missouri, and Lutheran Social Services, crisis nurseries, places like that, because what I do is I study family violence, child abuse and neglect. And my connection to food insecurity and child abuse and neglect came because of the farm. When I was in Champaign and thinking back to this idea, we've known for about 60 years that families who are in poverty are more likely to have contact with child protection services, to those children to experience both abuse and neglect. So from that came this question of why are families in poverty more likely to experience violence? And one of the questions I had was around food insecurity, because I don't know much, but one thing I do know, and I say this in many of my talks, that if we were all sitting in a room together right now, I would bet all the money in my pockets against all the money in your pockets that if you hadn't had lunch yet, you're much more likely to stand up, haul off, and hit the person next to you, right? Like, we all know that's what happens when we're hungry, that physiologically, there are things that happen to our bodies where we're more impulsive. It's harder to plan, it's harder to think, it's harder to be rational. And so that set me down this path of trying to explore this connection between child welfare, child well-being, food insecurity, and violence in particular. So I'm going to be presenting some of the research that I've been doing with Lutheran Social Services across the state of Missouri. My sense is that it'll be very similar to what we would find for families struggling with abuse and neglect in Illinois as well. So we'll talk a little bit, we'll kind of define food insecurity, talk about this connection between how food insecurity and child abuse and neglect, and also how to serve families struggling with food insecurity. And right before I start, one of the best things about being a professor is that I get access to all sorts of data. And one of the data sets that I have access to is from the Centers for Disease Control. And it's just from last year. So Angela, I know you're in the car and you were wondering about ADHD and food insecurity. I just ran the numbers actually as you were talking. About 1 in 12 kids in the United States have ADHD. 1 in 5 kids who are food insecure have ADHD. So that's the difference. So there absolutely is a connection between food insecurity and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So I just wanted to get that out there before go into my presentation. Food insecurity is actually a pretty broad term. It's lacking the physical or economic access to sufficient quantities of affordable, nutritious food for an active and healthy life. So many times when we have this dichotomous, either food insecure or not food insecure measure, what that actually is picking up is a really heterogeneous group of families and households in the United States, because it's picking up households who said, last night I went to bed hungry, I didn't have enough food. It's also picking up households that said, I'm kind of anxious about whether my food is going to run out, or I'm anxious about the quality of my food, not necessarily the quantity of my food. I'm getting plenty of food, but the quality isn't as good as it could be. So it's a very heterogeneous group, not a homogeneous group. So when I'm looking at families, I'm really trying to break down different levels of severity of food insecurity for various reasons. But what I want you to ask yourself throughout this presentation is, what makes food different than poverty? What makes food insecurity, not having enough food, different than poverty? Not having enough money. And here's sort of a basic breakdown of different levels of severity of food insecurity. The marginal food security, again, is sort of this sense of, I'm anxious about whether my food's going to run out. Low food security is that the quality of the food is not as good as it could be because we don't have enough money, or again, not just money, we don't have access to physical access to a grocery store that actually has good quality food at it. And then at the very low end is, luckily, very few families or households in the United States struggle with very low food security. But this is essentially what we would consider hunger. These are people going to bed hungry at night, cutting portions of their meals because there's not enough food, skipping meals because there's not enough food, those kinds of things. And you can break down food insecurity by when you have households with children, whether the adults are experiencing it, the children are experiencing it, or both the adults and the children are experiencing. So this is from 2022. About 17% of households with kids in the United States are food insecure. About half of those are sort of the marginal type food insecure. Only about 1% of households in the United States have very low food security among children. So these are kids who are, the quantity of their food is being affected, or their eating patterns are being affected. Another thing to know about food insecurity is that it can be inconsistent. So there was a study that was done by the USDA not too long ago that actually followed families who were food insecure, or households that were food insecure, for 5 years. And actually only 6% of households in that 5 years were chronically food insecure. So didn't come out of food insecurity, go back into food insecurity, that sort of thing. Actually, half of the families were only food insecure for 1 year. So this can ebb and flow over time as well. So in terms of why food insecurity might be different than poverty, and I guess I'd take one more step back. So the families that I serve and I study are families who are at risk for child protection contact. So these are families that are very poor, living in very poor areas. And you think that child abuse and neglect actually might not happen to a lot of kids. And you might actually think that food insecurity might not happen to a lot of kids. But here's two sort of statistics to disabuse you of that idea. So we think around 37% of kids at some point in their life will have contact with child protection. So more than 1 in 3 kids in the United States will have some sort of contact with child protection, some sort of investigation around abuse or neglect. We also, some new research that came out from Washington University, a guy named Mark Rank, who's a fantastic poverty researcher, had his paper that came out a few years ago that 50%, so half of kids by the time they're 18 have their families have been on food stamps. Now, it might not have been necessarily food insecure in how we're defining these things, but that just gives you a scope of what we're dealing with here in the United States. But typically the families that that I'm researching, they're the ones that are at a high risk for having child welfare contact. 80% of child welfare contact or child protection investigations are around neglect, not around physical abuse or sexual abuse. It might be part of it, but it teeters around 75 to 80%. And neglect is always the omission of care. Not supervising kids as well as they should be supervised depending on their developmental age, not providing food, not providing medical intervention if they get hurt, those kinds of things. And that can absolutely be due to poverty. And sometimes that also is due to sort of malicious intent of the parent as well. So, and just a quick little difference between Illinois and Missouri. In Illinois, it is you can be investigating, you can have your children removed from your care due to poverty. In Illinois, in Missouri. In Illinois, it's a little bit different. It never actually occurs, but on the books, that's actually part of our difference between our two states, is that poverty in itself is a reportable, and also it reaches the threshold of harm to a child that they could potentially be removed from their families in the state of Missouri. So so it's really, really important to intervene with these families, to social workers to come, to the community to sort of wrap themselves around them to try and help them, so we can keep the kids at home and keep them healthy and happy. So those are the families that we're sort of that I study, and it's a bigger group of families than you might typically think. So here's just a quick slide of some of the similarities between food insecurity and sort of families that are maybe just struggling with poverty. The similarities is economic stress causes trade-offs, sort of this cumulative risk idea that food insecurity is just one more adversity that the family has to get over. There could be mental health challenges, there could be substance misuse challenges, there could be community violence. And then the family has to now deal with not having enough food, right? The economic stress and trade-offs, we know families, parents in particular, do this all the time. The families that I study do this all the time. They will, it's either paying the utility bills or paying the grocery bill, right? It's either getting my medication or getting food for my kids. So there's economic there's these cost benefit analysis that happen in families, and that's where there's kind of similar. The difference is food is different than just poverty. Not the idea that you might not have enough food. There's actually evolutionary tension in that we've evolved to be really stingy with our resources, that we want to get the food. And take care of ourselves and take care of our kids. Psychological, it's a little bit different. It's in terms of food, it's tied to your role as a provider. Talk to many parents, particularly moms, who say that they internalize this idea that, like, there's not enough food for my children. That makes me feel terrible. Like I'm supposed to be their nurturer and I'm supposed to be their protector, and there's not enough food. And they feel that throughout the day. And that's different than the feeling of not having enough money to pay the rent. You might not think about not having enough money to pay the rent until the last week of the month, and then you're really worried about that. But think about the kids that you know, particularly little kids. How often are they hungry? How often are kids asking for snacks? It's all the time. And if you're not able to provide that food, then you have to constantly be telling your child, we don't have enough right now. And so there's this chronic sort of a chronic sort of sense of sort of psychological distress that causes, because as a provider, you want to provide to your for your kids. And again, the last one is just biological, physiological in nature. Again, if you're depriving your brain of nutrients, your brain is going to be more impulsive, less likely to plan, and actually be more violent. We have lots of research around this, particularly with different kinds of monkeys, that experimental designs that show, and different other kinds of mammals, that if you're hungry, you're more likely to be violent. So one of the things one of the questions I had was, how much food insecurity is there, and what kind of food insecurity is there for families who are at risk for child protection contact, or at risk for some sort of child welfare contact? So I did a study across Missouri about back in 2018. And this is what we found, is that half of the families, the households with kids who are at risk for child abuse and neglect, were low or very low food security. So instead of 1% or about 7% of households in the United States, these families, it was about half. 63% of the families were using WIC, 75% were using SNAP, and 45% of these families have actually used a food pantry in the last year. So I got new data that just came in last month. We did another survey. This one was actually across Missouri. So got to some very rural parts of Missouri and Kansas City. So it's a little bit more of a generalizable sample for Missouri. And I had a better measure of food insecurity for these homes, looking at not just household food insecurity, but kids, to see how many kids are actually food insecure. And this is sort of what we found. So about 80% of the families, again, these are families who are being served by Lutheran Social Services or the equivalent of Catholic Charities, child welfare type agencies across the state, because they're at risk for child abuse and neglect. So 80% of them are food insecure, if we just use that sort of umbrella term. Actually 45%, so almost half, both the adults and the kids in the household have very low food security. So these are both adults and kids in households who are going to bed hungry at night at some point in the previous year. 12%, the adults are very low food security, but the kids are not. And then we unfortunately have about 13% of households where the kids are have very low food security, but the adults are not. So, and only about 10% of the families have this sort of marginal food insecurity where there's just some anxiety. So the connection between sort of family violence, child abuse and neglect, and food insecurity is actually very, very strong. Almost all of these families are struggling with food at some point in the previous year. Not only are they struggling with food, I asked them some questions about sort of the resources that they had in the household. Almost 40% of the moms that I survey said they don't have adequate containers to store leftovers. And so that's a place where I think we can actually do some good in terms of just providing resources. We just need to provide some Tupperware to some of these families, and that might actually help with food insecurity. 20% said they had inadequate dinnerware. They don't have enough plates or cups or silverware. 23% said they don't have mixing spoons and cooking utensils. And actually 18%, so about 1 in 5, don't have a dinner table or even a space available in their home to actually sit down and have a meal together. And there's another sort of level of questions I asked around what's called like plumbing poverty across Missouri. And actually 3% of these families don't have a refrigerator, 4% don't have a stove or a range, 7% don't have a microwave, and 5% is what we call plumbing poverty. So they don't have actually piped hot water into their homes. So these are very, very poor families, some of them. It's a very small percentage. The good news is that most of the families, like 95%, know how to cook and actually want to cook more. They just simply do not have the resources to do it. So I'll kind of skip this part. I did some qualitative work as well, interviewing some of the parents, and found sort of what other research has found. Again, the trade-offs that happen, the worry that happens, the internalizing of these different roles particularly as a mother, that not able to provide for their kids some of the most basic needs that they have around just proper food. So, and it can be sort of very emotional. But the other thing about these families, and as a social worker, they would kick me out of the profession if I didn't talk about strengths. So, you know, social work is different than other kinds of helping professions in that we're not just focused on sort of deficits, but we're also focused on the strengths of families. So there's a lot of open communication that happens in the homes where the parents are talking to the kids. There's actually a very strong reliance on faith and hope. Even families that are not connected to a faith community or a place of worship in their community, like almost all of the moms that I talked to talked about prayer and the importance of prayer and having hope for the future. So yeah, and also utilizing resources in their community and their neighbors. If they live in a good neighborhood where the people trust each other, parents talked about how they would get together with other families that are struggling with food insecurity and actually have potlucks. They would call each other up and say, "I've got beans today. What do you have?" And they would get a more nutritious meal together by actually communicating with their neighbors, and they would eat together at someone's house. So there's a lot of resiliency that happens as well. I don't want to paint this sort of really dark picture, even though these families are really, really struggling, that they are utilizing the resources that they have and relying on each other, relying on their faith, and really doing well communicating with each other and trying to overcome these barriers. So I'll kind of leave it at that. So I've got a few minutes to answer any sort of questions. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so very much, Jesse. That one just, I think, filled in a lot of holes and painted a picture, I think, a little better for us of just what results within families when food is scant. And I really appreciate you especially focusing on the strengths of people, because I think we've seen that a lot where whether at our distributions or folks we've been talking to about, why they are food insecure, what they need to for a better situation. And we've run into the same thing of needing kitchen kits space, and then also meeting people that are taking upon themselves to cook for folks that can't, and that network and those relationships that help bring people together and can be more resilient in times of leanness. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm sure there are questions, so I'm going to open it up either for the chat or if you want to unmute. Comments or questions?
Yeah,
Fine.
I have a question, Jesse.
Okay.
Where is the link? Who's getting your data? I'm talking about providers, policymakers. Is there a channel that folks who need to know this get this information?
Yeah. So it'll go through the sort of the typical academic channels and journals and things like that. But I work closely with Lutheran Social Services of Missouri, presenting this. They actually have been fantastic because I had the caseworkers hand out these surveys. So they handed out 350 surveys to the people that they serve in the last 6 months. So they're really invested in this, and their leadership is really invested in this as well, because they see this every day when they go into homes. They see these families struggling with food insecurity, and typically what happens is you get so reliant on what's in your community. So if there are good food pantries in the community, SNAP is important, but the previous presenters talked about, it's not a lot of money. And so you're really scraping by trying to find places, and the social workers and community workers that are working with these families are doing the exact same thing because they don't have access to the resources either. So they're trying to connect these families as best they can. And so, yeah, so that's who will get this information in Missouri in particular.
Tomas has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I have one question for you, Jesse, and also for Nick and Noelle, if they're still on the call. Yeah, it looks like they are. Yeah, just wanted to definitely appreciate your lens of providing the connection between social emotional facets and food inaccessibility. Wanted to ask though, when we examine the health impacts of food insecurity, is there is there a substantial linkage between like its comorbidities and or reframed like how is trauma and sort of PTSD like as a result of various social determinants like food insecurity, economic immobility, and community violence, how is that factored in? Um, Maybe also reframed like how or what is the bidirectional relationship between stress and an individual's nutritional status. Um, yeah, just considering like the trauma as a contributing factor for like stress-induced heart disease, stress-induced diabetes, or even acknowledging that like trauma and stress can generate PTSD like symptoms that can mirror the symptoms of ADHD and possibly lead to like potential bubbles and misdiagnoses. How is like a community or an individual state of like perpetual stress and trauma, or just being in a state of general like poverty with all of the hormonal spikes that are associated with that, like how is that factored into examining their nutritional health? And as like the interventions for diet led to like sustainable impacts in an individual's health status long term, or
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit of that. So one of the things that I was able, we're learning more as research gets more sophisticated and people start actually paying attention to these problems. And so one of the questions I have is, again, what makes food different? And so I'll just talk about two studies that I was able to do. One was using sort of like machine learning to actually create groups of families in the United States and then look at the health impact of different adversities. And so it basically came up with these sort of four groups in the United States. About 75% of households in the United States with kids are doing pretty well. They're not experiencing sort of toxic stress or really serious trauma. About 10% are sort of this severe poverty, which has food insecurity in it as well. Another about 10 or 11% have some sort of parent mental illness or substance abuse problem. So that's primarily what sort of the adversity that that group was experiencing. And then you have this about 3.5% of families in the United States that are struggling with all of it. And if you look at the health outcomes of the kids of those four different kinds of families, the kids who are in poverty and it's experiencing food insecurity, but doing okay, mom and dad are doing okay, and everything else is doing okay, or the kids who mom and dad are really struggling with some mental illness, mom or dad has been arrested, but everything else is doing okay. They look worse in terms of child development. They look worse in terms of child health. They look worse in terms of mental health of the kids. That 3.5% though far exceeds everything else. And so for me, what that has always said is that I am laser focused on my work on that 3%. Because I really want to raise the floor as an analogy. But we do also know that one of the other studies that I've done is I looked at infants who've experienced different kinds of maltreatment. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, those kinds of things. And then I was able to actually look at the infants who were food neglected. So as a form of maltreatment. And those babies who are not getting food have much worse development over time than even the babies who were physically abused, sexually abused, and other kinds of neglected. So in that way, food is really, really important in terms of that first year of life, the first couple of years of life, because in terms of child development, there's certain windows where the lack of food can be absolutely devastating. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but that's what I got for you. Thank you for the question.
well, thank you.
Jesse, may I ask a question? What amazing research that you've brought forth today. It's just, it's very, very moving. And
Thank you.
I've been I've been doing, in the work, in the trenches, trying to help. But of course, there's so much more to do. Do you have some resources that point to programs that actually help, that meet some of the issues that you talked about today? Do you see some programs that have some best practices that, hey, this actually worked, this helped in this situation? Can you point us to some of those?
Yeah, I love the question, by the way. Yes and no. So I always like to sort of figure out like who I'm trying to serve first, and then sort of if it's effective or not. So these families that are like really, really struggling, some things that are absolutely work are things like backpack programs, where kids are given food for the weekend. But again, the need of those kids versus the needs of a kid who is from like a working poor family that have some access and some resources. Is going to be a little bit different. SNAP, from the research that I've seen, pulls families that are really, really impoverished kind of out of that and gets them close to the poverty line. So we're talking, pulling a family that's at 10% of the federal poverty line up to 25 or 40% of the federal poverty line. So WIC, again, is another good program. But there's problems with those programs, right? So like with WIC, access problems can be difficult. It can be difficult for a mom who doesn't have good transportation to make it to those appointments, so they can then get those benefits. But I'm not sure. I know that there's been studies of like food pantries, and I'm convinced that the local, small church food pantry does immeasurable amounts of good for families that go unnoticed and untested and unexamined. But nothing, I mean, we know what it would take, but we also know that it would take political capital and a lot of resources. And those things are not in abundance in either of our states. So,
And do you know of like local programs that that you feel like, wow, that this program just kind of hit it, that they really addressed some of the issues, and they've been successful in what they've done, even something on the local level?
Yeah, so there's a place in St. Louis called Propel Kitchen that I'm doing some work with. And so right now they're providing sort of meals to patients that get discharged from the heart clinic at SSM here, sort of our main hospital for people in poverty. And I really love the programs that take the time to talk to families about what they actually like to eat, and sort of create a plan for them. That way, particularly when they have kids. I've talked to plenty of parents who will put down on their survey that they only buy one kind of vegetable, that they have a lack of variety of fruits and vegetables in their home. And they said, that's because my kid will only eat corn. I am not going to buy broccoli and know that my kid is not going to eat that. And I'm just going to be throwing away that dollar for that frozen broccoli. So I'm only going to pick corn. So helping those families sort of try and diversify their menu. So like the first speakers talked about, it could diversify the nutrients that the kids are getting. That seems to be really good work. But again, that takes time, a lot of time to sit down and talk, and takes resources.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we are over time now. I would encourage you to, if you have questions for either Jesse, Nick, or Noelle, to either put them in the chat. You're welcome to send them to me directly. I can pass them on. It's solagradiadirector@gmail.com. Then also, I just want to note that our next State of the Plate speaker is, we have Lisa Wilson from the Refugee Project, and then Nicole Dowling from Family Services, and they're going to be talking about what it actually looks like to navigate our food system and local resources from the immigrants' perspective and from seniors' perspective. and what's working, what's not. And then finally, Solo Grady is hosting a happy hour tonight at Riggs from 6 to 8. We're going to have some food there. There'll also be a food truck, a lot of good people coming together. So if you want to continue the conversation, and I know, Jesse, you're not in town,
I would
be the
love
time.
to. No, that sounds wonderful.
But yeah, please come out and join a group of folks that are like-minded and wanted to make our world a little better place and have some fun. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to you, Jesse, and Nick and Noelle, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. And thanks to everyone for spending your lunch hour with us, and hope to see you soon. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So long.